Food prices keep going up, and we were warned of worldwide food shortages. China, the world's largest food importer, has been hoarding food, contributing to the rising food prices. China has 20% of the world's population, but will have stockpiled 69% of the globe's maize reserves, 60% of rice, and 51% of wheat by mid-2022. Over the past 5 years, China's imports of beef, pork, dairy, and fruit jumped 2 to 5-fold. Why does China hoard so much food? Hello everyone, welcome to Lei's Real Talk. I'm Lei. Some people attribute China's food hoarding to the communist regime's preparation for a possible military attack on Taiwan. That might be one reason, but I won't focus on that today. The world's most populous country's over-reliance on imported food is the result from a series of problems unique to China due to its Chinese-style socialist economy. The problem is 20 years in the making. Up until 2002, the Beijing government had set a goal of being 95% self-sufficient in terms of food. After China joined the WTO, it started importing food from the international market. From 2003 to 2017, China's agriculture imports grew sevenfold, from $14 billion to $105 billion. And China became the world's largest agriculture importer in 2019. In October 2013, Foreign Policy magazine warned us in the article titled, "China's Food Demand Will Drive Up Global Food Prices." In 2016, Japan's Asahi Shimbun reported that the price of Japanese school uniforms has risen because of the hot pot fever in China, the world's largest importer of lamb. Hot pot is a Chinese dish that features lamb. The popularity of the dish resulted in more sheep being raised for food and less for wool, causing a price hike in Japanese school uniforms. In China's state-controlled economic model, being self-sufficient in food meant having enough rice to feed 1.4 billion people. As the chart shows, with more wealth, the Chinese eat more protein in their diet, which caused an uptick in demand for meat and dairy products. The authorities discovered that the demand for soybeans was 5 times more than China's domestic production. Of the total imported grain, only 30% is for human consumption. Over 40% is for feedstock. The biggest factor behind China's demand for imported food is the price. Domestically produced grains are actually more expensive than imported grains, making Chinese authorities want to buy. Take wheat, for example. In September 2018, the Chinese government bought wheat from Chinese farmers at the price of 2.4 yuan per kilo, translating into $352 per metric ton. That's 60% higher than the global wheat price at $220 per metric ton. A Chinese author made this comparison of agriculture in China and the United States in a 2018 article. The United States is the world's most powerful agricultural nation with a farming population of less than 3 million, while China has a rural population of 600 million, over 200 times more than the United States, and still cannot feed its people. In addition, China's amount of food consumption per capita is 0.45 tons, less than half of the United States at 1.1 tons. I think the author quoted old data, but the article nonetheless points out the biggest problem in Chinese agriculture: inefficiency. The United States has 1% of its labor force working on farmlands and is the largest exporter of agriculture products globally, while China dedicates 20 to 30% of its labor force to agriculture, but is the largest importer of food. What caused the inefficiency is not something the communist regime can fix, because it has to do with the fundamental difference between a capitalistic economy and a communist system. China's rural land policy has undergone several changes since the CCP took power in 1949, but one thing has remained the same. The peasants don't own the land. Farmers only have the right to use the land, but not the right to own it. This prevents peasants from having the incentive to grow their farming business. It also means that they can't use the land as collateral to raise capital to finance growth. Farmers are just selling their labor to the landowner, which is the government. Young people thus leave for the city for better opportunities, leaving behind small mom-and-pop farms that don't have the means to modernize. The labor-intensive farming makes the grains expensive to produce. Even though the government buys grains from Chinese farmers at a higher than the global market price, Chinese farmers are still impoverished. In 2018, urban income were nearly 3 times higher than in rural areas, roughly the same gap as in 1978 when economic reforms began. Beijing's policy to prioritize urban development at the expense of agricultural development has gone so far as to prohibit growth in rural areas. Farmland expropriated for public interest purposes. Village officials, collaborating with real estate developers and local government, force farmers off the land to sell it to urban projects for profits. The number of peasants who lost their farms to industrial parks, shopping malls, tourist attractions, and infrastructure was estimated at 140 million up until 2020. No one can estimate how much total arable land was lost in this way. The lack of arable land in China is an essential factor limiting agricultural growth. China must feed 20% of the world's population with only 7% of the world's arable land, but nearly half of the land has been degraded by decades of unchecked development. China is the world's largest producer and consumer of chemical fertilizers. The average amount of chemical fertilizer used in China was 400 kilo per hectare. This is much higher than the world's recognized limit of 225 kilo per hectare, and more than 4 times the average amount used in Europe and the United States. The overuse of chemical fertilizers has contributed to soil acidification, the reduction of organic matter, as well as the release of greenhouse gases. In addition to fertilizer overuse, China uses 47% of the world's pesticides on 7% of its arable land. In 2020, China's pesticide utilization rate for rice, corn, and wheat reached 41%, 4 times the world average. Data released by the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Ministry of Land and Resources show that at least 20% of China's arable land is contaminated. The 2013 discovery of cadmium-contaminated rice in central China and a series of food scandals made anxious Chinese consumers abandon domestic rice and opt for foreign-produced rice. Water pollution is also an environmental hazard. People are concerned about eating crops grown on contaminated land with polluted water. After 20 years of overzealous pursuit of GDP growth and urbanization, and the disregard for the well-being of 50% of its population, the peasants, the regime is stuck with several problems with no solutions: poverty in the rural areas, rising food costs, growing reliance on imported food, and loss of arable land. On December 8th, Xi Jinping said at the Central Economic Work Conference, "In some areas, a lot of good land is not used for growing grain. It's used to build farms or plant flowers and fruit trees. But what about grain?" His "but what about grain" became the headline of Chinese media that shocked the public because it confirmed the public's fear of pending food shortage. Despite the ongoing wheat shortage, this year some Chinese farmers harvested or cut their wheat seedlings before they matured. This is because they can sell the green seedlings at 1,500 yuan per Chinese acre to companies that make silage for animal feed. They get more money this way than the 1,000 yuan per acre from selling the wheat. It's the perfect example to show the problem with China's quasi-capitalist, Chinese-style socialist economy. When you don't give people true land ownership, people don't have a long-term plan for themselves or their business. They're only after making some quick money while they still can, and will do anything to make money. Isn't that the problem we've witnessed in China in the past 30 years? Based on everyone's input, I've decided to do my first live streaming event this Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm quite excited. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.